Hello, friends, family, both, neither, everything in between, my people. How are we doing? Welcome to episode 13. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. First things first, I want to say, holy shit, we hit 1,000 listens in total on the podcast, which is huge. I had no idea that this would even happen. I know that, like, man, if I put out 1,000 episodes and I listened to every one, I'd hit it. But like, I mean, in 13 episodes, I think that's pretty good, right? I feel pretty fucking grateful. So thank you guys. I mean, massive, huge, an outright win. Thank you. I saw that, and I haven't posted it. Funny enough, yet I should post that when I'm done recording this. But huge. This episode is interesting. I have not really dove into something like this. I think I did a little bit on the confidence episode, like episode 2. But today's episode is on masculinity and how I feel about it and how I feel the culture has gone. I really think that it's just constantly swinging back and forth from being a man and being masculine is something to shame, and being a man and being masculine should be the dominant culture. And I disagree with both of those for different reasons. I think that how we got here is rooted in a lot of the movements that have been happening over the last decade, maybe 20 years. It's just a constant counterculture. And I kind of wanted to rant on it a little bit. So I really don't know how I come off here. I hope I come off as like humble and understanding and not too fucking cocky about shit, or not trying to make people be like, oh, men have it so hard, because that's really not my goal here. I'm really just trying to stick it and keep it straightforward but also accurate. So who knows? I try to keep my intros from being long-winded, but if you got opinions on this, even if they're disagreeable ones, throw them my way and I can clarify on shit, or I can validate shit. But this is definitely unlike any episode I've made before. And so that always makes me curious as to how it comes off, or if I'm making any sense to y'all. But why don't you guys just listen for yourselves? I'll just send us straight in. Thank you for listening to Unserious University. This is episode 13. I am your host, and we're going to get right into it. Later. Whew. All right. Hi, guys. We're going to do an interesting one this time around. I actually started recording this. It went for about 5 minutes and thought, okay, I can structure this better. I can word all this better. So this is take 2 in hopes that I come out of this with a better idea of what I'm trying to get at here. As you know, I record the intro and do the title of the podcast and all of this stuff, my posts. I do this all after. So right now I have no idea what I'm titling this. But I'm willing to bet that from the title or from my post, you have some general idea of what I'm talking about. And hopefully I worded it better than me going off the rip. But something has been on my mind on and off for honestly the last year or two has been the overcorrection of the cultural pendulum when it comes to male, like when it comes to masculinity, when it comes to men, when it comes to their public image, when it comes to conversations in the space. And I will start off with, I understand that a lot of my listeners are women. And so this episode won't be necessarily personally relatable for you, but my hope is that it acts as kind of a window into the male psyche, and not the kind of window when you're talking to some meathead guy who's faking a friendship with you, but genuinely someone who is doing their best. And so I hope that it provides some value for you guys as well. And for the men, I really hope that this maybe for some is a wake-up call, maybe for others is cathartic, because I'm recognizing some of the same phenomena that you have been seeing. Or maybe this is completely new information and novel because you're not chronically online like me. But as I approach unk status and I watch my 20s slip away, in a totally non-depressing way, I have lived long enough to watch something culturally shift one way and then overcorrect the other way. And I genuinely believe that this has happened in the male space, in male culture, quote unquote. And so I'm going to try to break down where I believe it started. And you can keep going back and forth, and the pendulum will just swing back and forth a bunch of times. But when it comes to status quo, where I believe it started, and then where I believe it overcorrected to, which is currently where we have these like male idols and like godlike status of people like Andrew Tate, and what I hope to see moving forward, and what I will attempt to push moving forward, in hopes that we find a healthier middle ground. Because, you know, I'm obsessed with middle grounds. But okay. So, and also with that being said, I'm going to say some things that are going to make men sound like victims. I personally do not have a victim mindset in the slightest. And I think that we fortunately live in a great enough modernity and in a free enough country where most people can set out to do what they want and achieve it. I understand it may be harder for some individuals, but I believe that over the long run, people who work hard and who are consistent and have the right plans are going to succeed. Point blank, period. So you got to understand that that's my mindset when I start moving forward and I start saying things. I'm going to say some stuff that may make men sound like victims. And I know that there are certain people who are going to shrivel at the thought of that immediately. I'm begging you to bear with me. Half the reason I started this podcast was to open people's minds to different perspectives. And I am really not trying to say that anyone particularly deserves special treatment. I really don't think that really helps people most of the time. I think there are those few cases. But I really just kind of want to hammer this point home. I think any girlfriend of mine can vouch that I am not out of touch and am not speaking out of my ass. And so it's going to feel weird, but I really feel like I have to describe things accurately if I actually want to be able to paint a picture of what has really happened culturally, so that maybe some of the women listening can understand why Andrew Tate's even successful in the first place, rather than just some simple explanation of, oh, he's a douchebag and he attracts douchebags. Like, yes, that's true, but there's a much larger thing going on here. And I think that it will make sense if we follow this timeline. So let me get to the meat of the bone. Let's dive in. I noticed personally around 2014, 2015, this was kind of when we had this really hard shift and push, or at least when it started gaining traction for third wave feminism. I understand that pretty much every social justice movement is rooted in good intention. Personally, I believe that the output of a movement or the output of a system most of the time is actually what matters, not the intention. I think intentions are great, but anyone who commits a terrible act can attempt to justify their actions with intention. And that's why we still have punishment with crime, because intentions really don't paint the full picture. But nonetheless, there was the culture of third wave feminism, and it came from a place of, we're trying to close the gap. Like, yes, women have the majority of the same rights as men, but when you look at certain numbers or when you look at certain metrics, there's still some work to be done. And I totally think that there have been some beneficial outputs of this movement, particularly the push to get women in STEM. I really enjoy seeing women be encouraged to work in places that aren't the traditional sectors that they usually dominate in, and then enjoying it. I do believe that there's so much of the way that we behave as people, particularly with gender roles, that are rooted in nature, that are rooted in like deep instinct. And I don't think that that's a sin to acknowledge. So I think that women dominating the nursing space, for the most part, can be rooted in some sort of instinctual caring behavior, which I think is a good thing. And men dominating certain spaces that require much more of like harder labor, I don't think that it's just the fact that men biologically are stronger. I do think that men get more of a high off of building things and working with their hands than women do on average. And so you're just going to kind of see more men feel like it's their quote unquote calling, or feel drawn to those kind of spaces. But nonetheless, I think some of the greatest outputs of that third wave feminism have been kind of like the push for women in STEM, or overall just the push for women to get an education. I know that within my lifetime is when women gained the status of more formally educated than men. There are more women with degrees and with college education than there are men, and so there have been some good things that come out of it. But there was a lot of bad that also came out of it, and it was mainly online. It was mainly a lot of the people who took the movement too far, bastardized a lot of it in the namesake of social justice. And if you were online at this time, I'm sure you remember a lot of the most ridiculous discussions being had. But I think that this is important to note. It's not a coincidence that I'm going back to this point, because this stuff followed up from like the 90s and early 2000s, where the culture in the media space was centered around thin, beautiful women. The classic Carl's Jr. ad, every magazine cover at the time, the Paris Hilton aesthetic. That's where things were. Funny enough, that's where things are going now. And I don't think it's coincidence. I think it's an overcorrection. A lot of this conversation around feminism absolutely despised that culture. They hated the fact that it was putting unfair beauty standards on women. They hated what it was forcing the women who were trying to match these beauty standards to go through, whether it be plastic surgery or anorexic like diets, bulimic habits, stuff like that. And so there was this super hard push against that image. And a lot of the issues started coming out when people who basically, the thing that the internet did, particularly social media, is it made everyone have a voice. When before, in order to even get on stage and have a voice, most of the time you needed good ideas, and you needed to also be able to express them well. Social media completely eliminated that. They made it so anyone can go viral, anyone can have a platform, anyone can build an audience. And yes, that's fantastic. I mean, look at me right now. I am doing the same exact thing. But I really care about my opinions and my ideas being correct and accurate and beneficial and morally good. Whereas most people, at least online, don't give a fuck about any of that. They just care about being right, even if that doesn't mean that they're correct. And so, from this movement, we started getting really bad ideas. We started getting conversations about how, like, just changing the definitions of certain words, changing the definitions around conversations about rape, or conversations about men's place in society and how much they contribute to the oppression of women and XYZ. And there were a lot of conversations happening that basically felt like it was a straight bastardization of men in general. It was I remember vividly people would post like very smeared, vague blanket statements about men, and then someone would come in the comments and they'd be like, well, not all men are like this, and then everyone would collectively be like, oh, like, we don't want you a part of this conversation. And I understand where the sentiment comes from, I understand where the frustration comes from, but this sort of like set up, this sort of unfair marketplace of ideas dominated the online space, particularly Twitter, but then Facebook and Instagram, because they're both Zuckerberg companies, also started leaning this way. And then a lot of the mainstream media started going that way. And this was also where I felt like mainstream media started getting bad. Like, you had places like Vox and BuzzFeed being like the first ones to go, where they were just posting horrible shit. And then you watch places like CNN or MSNBC or New York Times like start to crack as well, where you're like, these were these entities of truth and objectivity and unbiased reporting, and suddenly they're doing think pieces and opinion articles and starting to thread humor into certain stories where you're clearly leaning one side on things. And all that to say, I genuinely believe that there was a huge silent majority of men who felt like, because of this constant beratement online, like they were getting beat to a pulp, because it wasn't enough that people were saying awful things about men in general online, but it was also the fact that men were not allowed in the conversation. So like, even the guys who were trying to come from a good place and try to speak on these issues were getting completely shut out and told to fuck off and told that they're the problem. And again, I'm not telling you this because you need to feel sorry for men. There are a ton of men in this world that deserve to be under the ground. I agree with you. I know that if you look at crime statistics, like, we are more violent constantly. Like, it is not any shocker. I understand. But you gotta be able to see the perspective of being a good intentioned guy in this space and time and getting told that you're the problem. No, I don't care what good you think you've done. You are probably so unaware of your role in society that you're not even aware of how much bad you've done. And it turned into this constant back and forth of how these people who are dominating these online conversations could one-up each other, who could be even more feminist or even more social justice. How could you reclaim that spot on the podium as number one, I care about the little guy the most? And meanwhile, in order to support this sort of online discussion, you need the framework of believing that almost every social dynamic or social interaction has to be viewed through the lens of oppressor and oppressed. Even if in reality you're looking at two people who are like nepo babies, very well off, life has been handed to them on a silver platter, like they genuinely will not know the struggle that most people know. Even if you're talking about these two people, they will look for who is more oppressed in that space, and then make the person who's less oppressed feel bad or feel like they're obligated to treat this less better off, quote unquote, person with some sort of special treatment. This sort of framework is applied everywhere, constantly, all the time. And what that did essentially was, A, if you were a man, and B, especially if you were a white man, you you might as well just not have an opinion. You might as well not open your mouth. And I'm not making this shit up. Like, I remember being a frustrated teenager reading all of these topics online. And it's one thing for like some random basement dwelling loser to have a bad opinion about egalitarianism. But these were being perpetuated by like members of society that had large platforms, whether it be celebrities or politicians or entire corporations, or even if the corporation wasn't particularly saying it themselves, they would platform people who were regurgitating these like awful opinions. And so what ended up happening was, I genuinely believe that there was a huge pool of resentment that built up in a lot of young men's eyes. They could not stand the fact that they were being told, fuck you, you're the problem. No, you're not allowed to disagree. I don't care if you've come with points to be made or logic or statistics or XYZ. The fact that you're even a man means that you're too blinded by the way that society is completely built around you that you can't even form a useful opinion. So we're going to discard everything you say and continue with this emperor has no clothes discussion, proudly, loudly, and claiming that it's all for the sake of proper morality, and then going to the streets and advocating for legislative change on these foundational beliefs. And it frustrated a lot of people. I mean, I could talk to, hold on, let me grab my water. I could talk to men at the time, and they were either completely pissed or playing into it and pretending like they agreed with these points, which basically lowered their status to, you're not allowed to partake in any discussions that are about making the world a better place in these spaces. Also, I listed celebrities and corporations and the government, but also it was very heavily perpetuated in universities. Any space of high learning was salivating at these ideas because they felt so radically progressive that it was like exploring a new frontier intellectually. Even if they were rooted in fallacy, these places loved this stuff, ate it up, built courses around them, the whole nine. And if you were chronically online at the time, I'm sure you remember seeing it. And I'm not here to tell you whether or not any of this stuff was warranted. I believe the majority of it wasn't, to be fair. But I'm here to just do my best to describe it accurately, because this exact environment that I'm trying to paint is what caused where we're at today. Because I think where we're at today is also a hellscape and also fucking awful. But now it just feels like this huge overcorrection. And so there was a lot of topics around toxic masculinity, as I'm sure people remember. And the issue was that this wave of progressive liberalism around the topic of masculinity was throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It was in the same breath saying ego problems were toxic masculinity, which, yes, they are. And then at the same time, it was like any sort of pride that you had in being a man was also toxic masculinity, which inherently is suggesting that you either should feel nothing or you should feel shame. But any sort of positive feeling towards your manliness or your manhood was seen as like a dog whistle for worse things to come. And like I said before, there were so many men who kept their mouth shut because they were told to, but just watched this stir and go on and on and on and on. And then you had the contrarians. You had the people who, for whatever reason, like, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but do you guys remember Meninism? It was like this counter movement to feminism when the third wave of feminism was really at its like zenith. And it was like posting all of these an account or multiple accounts on all the different social medias posting the most cringe, ridiculous, like feminists, quote unquote, who were like absolutely just full of fallacy, making some of the worst points I've ever heard. But they would just throw them up, and it resonated with so many young men and boys at the time that their accounts just blew up. They gained so much traction. I remember guys showing up in high school with the Meninism shirts, like the merch on, and they were avidly hated. Not the guys at school. People thought it was funny for the most part. But online, this whole movement was avidly hated. And for a while, I thought it was fine. Most of the time, it was just there to point out cringy, terrible takes. And then they started getting a little too ridiculous for me and lost me. But it proved to be the first crack in the armor, in my opinion, to show that there were a lot of people that really did not enjoy the conversations being had. And there were even girls that would join, quote unquote, on the side of Meninism, but they'd get called a pick-me, or they were also cringe, or you could tell that they actually were a pick-me. But it was the first sign of like a real swing in the other direction, and it showed that there was a lot of people who felt that way. And I don't know, God, fast forward to what, like 2016, and then Trump won the presidential race, funny enough, against a woman. And this is when you started getting a lot of the like MAGA bro, like douchebag conservatism wave. And this is me saying this when I have a good handful of friends who are on the MAGA bro side. And as much as maybe we will disagree on certain points politically, like I still think that they're great people with good hearts and have never really done anything to harm anyone. So I myself am even painting with a broad stroke here. But the first wave of Trump really felt like the only people who were getting caught up in the MAGA bro movement were like people who were already like notably self-identifying as Republican. And everyone else was kind of just like, whoa, that's crazy. Like the thought of wearing a MAGA hat in public was like asking to be attacked, and you were a freak and crazy if you did that. And it was like a huge cultural stance. It was like a big fucking deal, I remember. But I think that you started also getting glimmers and looks into these people who were sick of being told that they were the problem and that apologizing didn't mean anything, or no matter what you do, you will always be the problem because you were born a man and XYZ. And if some of you are hearing me and going, there's no way that this was happening at the time, believe me, I wish I was making it up. You can still find the articles that are like 10 years old or 8 years old now. You can go back to the screenshots of the online spaces and the discussions being had. It was fucking awful. And so we'll move a little forward. I want to be able to kind of reel it in quicker to current day. But there were a lot of people who started gaining platforms and started gaining voices because they were actively speaking out against this like terrible space culturally and socially. And all they had to do was the bare minimum. It was just so cathartic as a man to watch someone else like stand up and be like, no, I think that, you know, you should listen to a man's opinion if he has a good idea or whatever. And you think that that's like a bare minimum stance, but genuinely it was directly in the face of what this bastardized movement was. And just saying that alone got you a platform. I mean, people were willing to be like, oh my God, this guy's saying it like it is, blah, blah, blah. And they would gain followers. But it was also the reason a lot of people weren't doing it. Like, you know, you think back and you're like, okay, why didn't I just fucking do that and gain followers and fame and fortune and XYZ. And it was because it genuinely was a time and place where having these opinions was kind of scary online. People were actively getting canceled left and right, even for things that really either weren't that bad or weren't their fault, and no one had any remorse. And these people couldn't get their jobs back or, undo the things that were done to them. So it was a scary thing for these people to like step up and speak against the mob, in hopes that their livelihood didn't get ruined. And the issue was a lot of these like social media apps, that was hosting these terrible talks and discussions. They were very clearly like super leaning in the direction of supporting these people, whether it be out of fear, whether it be because they were being ran by people who were also of the same mindset or camp. But it was one thing for people to have these terrible opinions, but it was another thing for these people to not get deplatformed for straight up speaking hate speech against people. Like you could tweet like, I wish all men would, die by fire or by cancer or whatever. And you replace men with like any other group of people, and that would immediately get flagged and taken down. But because it was in line with the narrative at the time, it was completely allowed. They would, blow up, get dozens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of likes. And you would be like, holy shit, there are genuinely tons of people that support like this sort of sentiment about someone like me, or about like my brother or my dad, or enter wholesome man or boy in your life. And then as soon as someone would try to experimentally tweet the reverse, then it would just get flagged and they'd get suspended and they'd get banned and XYZ. And so there was very clearly favor for one side and not the other. And I also think that contributed to kind of the like psychosis at the time, where it was like, holy shit, like this really is the dominating opinion right now in these online spaces. And again, with that being said, this would all happen and I'd go out into the real world and things would still be okay. Most people didn't have Twitter. Most people's Instagram feeds were just food or travel locations. So most of the time, they weren't even privy to this happening. But I digress. So we move forward and you start getting people like Andrew Tate popping up, where this guy is not just making the counterpoint of like, hey, men matter too. Like, just because some of us are bad doesn't mean all of us should be treated like we're bad. XYZ. No, he is directly countering hate with hate. He is fighting fire with fire. And for so many of these men who are just absolutely emotionally exhausted from this, or genuinely have a fragile masculinity, whether it be through the traditional means of just being an insecure man, or it's become fragile due to the way that they see these conversations being had in universities and online and in media spaces and XYZ. They hear this guy spit poison right back and they love it. It is exactly what they have always dreamt of saying to these people, but knew that they never had the balls to. But here comes this guy who's going to be their fucking boy up to bat. And he is just like, women belong in the kitchen and all a woman is good for is making babies, and fuck you, I'm a man, I can have this opinion because I dominate the world and blah, blah, blah. Naturally, I encounter this guy and I'm like, holy fucking shit, please shut the fuck up, you're making us look worse. But the thing that I didn't expect was the amount of support that this guy was going to get. I mean, oh my God, he became a global phenomenon. Like, you would never think that someone like him, if you just looked at what he stood for on paper, would be spoken about by the president or like known globally in an infamous way. Like, he just sounds like another loser. But because he was going to post everything like Dan Blazerian's going to post everything, where he's constantly around basically naked women, filthy rich from whatever means, smoking a cigar, fit, driving a sports car, all of these things that men, if you're 15 and you're a boy and you make a dream board, like you're basically Andrew Tate. And so not only did this guy say the things that these insecure men were feeling and thinking, but then he was also showing like, look, I'm winning at life too. Like, I'm not just saying this and I'm some like fat basement dweller living in my mom's house. Like, I live the life that you jack off to, for lack of a better term. And also I get to say this shit and my life doesn't get ruined. And retroactively looking at it, totally makes sense why he blew up. But I just didn't think that there was this many guys out there that were so hurt by this shit that they felt like that they resonated with such a message. I mean, I was at the time, prior to him kind of going psycho, like I was so much more in favor of like Dave Rubin or Joe Rogan or some of these men who in 2016, 2017, 2018 had more reasonable opinions on things. And they were just like, no, I think this is a load of bullshit. I think they come from a good place, but you know, there's not good conversations being had. And I was like, yes, thank you. Like someone with their head on straight. Oh, how times have changed. But that was nice. That was cathartic for me. But then seeing this guy, I was like, oh yeah, this guy fucking sucks. There's no way anything's going to happen with him. Like I said, it was totally wrong. And then now you just see a ton. Oh, and I think it was another thing. Like, for instance, Jordan Peterson, right? If you don't know who Jordan Peterson is, he is a former professor at some Canadian university, and there was a clip of him that blew up because there was this huge social justice protest at his college, and they were screaming at him. God, I can't remember what it was, that he had to call people by certain pronouns or something like that, or he had to apologize for being a white man or whatever the fuck it was, one of those narratives. And he basically was like standing his ground against this angry mob, being like, no, you don't get to tell me what to do. I'm not going to do that. And that, as low effort as it sounds nowadays, was unheard of. I mean, everyone was folding with their tail in between their legs to anyone who was loud and in a mob, especially if they stormed an office at a university. So to see this guy not only like not budge, but do it physically, like stand his ground physically in person while surrounded by a bunch of people, he blew up. He immediately blew up, and he instantly gained a platform, started going on like speaking tours, wrote books. I mean, everything that you would expect if an intellectual gained fame, fortune, and a platform. Intellectual meaning like a professor. I know I personally have some certain beliefs with Jordan Peterson that I have a bone to pick with. But again, just another person coming from a good place, in my opinion, unless there's some shit out there I don't know about. And then he would talk about basically how you shouldn't be ashamed to be a man. You should feel proud. You should feel strong. You should feel proud about feeling strong. You should lean into all of these things. And again, just resonated with a ton of young men out there because they were constantly being berated. And his platform blew up. Tate's blew up. And I'm sure you can think of other people that I'm probably not thinking of right now because, to be so honest with you, I'm exhausted and I don't know how I've been talking for this long already. But this was the start of the counterwave. This was the start of clearly a ton of people were not a fan of the way that things had been going and wanted an opposite reaction. And then we had, I don't know, I'm going to start using like checkpoints for this timeline for presidencies, because I think going back and forth between a Republican and a Democrat presidency helped with who was passing the laws, where the media was at, kind of how the culture was going. And so Trump's presidency was filled with, his first presidency was filled with pandemonium. I mean, there were so many people saying the most asinine things about about him as a president that were so easily dismissible, but just because the entire culture was fuck Trump, everyone wanted to agree with it, and it like made a lot of these people lose their validity, in my opinion. And I remember it was the most insufferable news cycle period of my life. I mean, oh my God, everything was about Trump. I remember I deleted Twitter for like 7 months or something like that, 8 months, and just went off into the real world and kind of did my little nomad thing. Oh my God, I didn't hear about Trump ever. It was brilliant. And granted, I also don't watch the news, so I just was completely unplugged from it. And the world was so peaceful. It was great. But you plug right back in and it's just chaos. And the issue became that eventually this stuff really started getting politicized in a way where if you picked one side, you were basically siding with conservatism. And if you picked the other side, you were basically siding with liberalism. And obviously, anyone tapped in knew that the hardcore feminist anti-man stance plugged right into a lot of the toxic liberal ideas online. And then the pro-man, proud about traditional gender roles, toxic masculinity side of things plugged right into the Republican conservative framework. And so it wasn't enough that you had to disagree or agree with the conversations being had around feminism or men and their place in society and what change should or shouldn't happen. But then if you picked a side, you were also basically co-signing on the entire political stance of one of the parties. And this, in my opinion, is where the full counter swing of the pendulum really starts to happen. So Trump loses the second run for presidency to Joe Biden. Not, in my opinion, because Joe Biden was a good presidential candidate. It was because everyone was so sick of Trump. Or, in general, just sick of hearing about Trump. I genuinely think that there were some middle ground people in some of those swing states who voted against Trump because they were just so tired of the pandemonium. Not because they liked Biden. And we clearly saw that that was the case after Biden's run. But the issue that happened, in my opinion, and I haven't talked about politics much on here, but my personal belief is with this most recent presidential election, it's not enough to say that Trump won. The Democrats straight up lost this election. And this is why. Because during Biden's presidency, the left doubled down on everything that they stood for. It was like, this is where, the whole wokeism conversations really started picking up, at least getting mainstream. Like anyone who was chronically online already knew about what it meant to be woke, or the fact that term in general straight up originated in like a lot of the black cultural space before it even became like a political mainstream thing. Drewski's skit about being woke is actually more accurate to what the original idea was than what it means now. But this is when it started becoming like, oh, okay, like basically, in my opinion, I really think that the like mob of the left thought that when they saw those occasional counters to the movements and discussions happening in like the mid 2010s, they're like, oh, we need to squash these movements out. We need to squash out anyone who reminds me of Meninism or anyone who's like an Andrew Tate character. And so they just doubled down on so much ridiculous borderline propaganda for the sake of social justice. As always, it is always painted in the light of social justice, no matter how terrible the idea or how terrible the outcome or how like self-sabotaging it was. If you were telling people that you were doing it because you were fighting the oppressor and helping the oppressed, then you were immediately painted as a bad guy for disagreeing with it. And so there was this whole doubling down. There was this like, at this point, the culture reached this boiling point of like anyone in these left spaces, like Hassan Piker or like the Young Turks or any of these late night talk shows like Stephen Colbert. I mean, it wasn't enough to have better ideas than Republicans. You had to arrogantly parade around belittling these people. You had to shit on them and shit on them like on national television. You had to shit on them to huge audiences. And this is where you lose any middle ground person. I really believe that, like, I don't know, if I had to guess based off of people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis in a melting pot town politically and a blue state overall, I really think that like 60% of people view themselves as a moderate, as straight down the middle, leaning a little left on one issue, leaning a little right on another issue. And then maybe 20% of people are left wing and 20% of people are right wing. Now, granted, you go to San Francisco, that percentage is going to change. You go to Alabama, that pie chart's going to look different. I completely understand that. But you go to places like Ohio, places like Wisconsin, places like certain parts of Arizona and Nevada, basically all the swing states, you're going to get pretty much that same ratio, in my opinion. Like for every 6 moderates, you get 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And what people do not understand is if you are constantly catering and parading around to the 20% on the left, especially if you're the one in charge of most of the government spaces and dominating on the media culture front of things, and in like Hollywood, for instance, if you're dominating all these spaces, but you are hardcore catering to the kind of like the more radical side of that spectrum, you're going to lose fucking everyone who is to the right of you, which is the 60% of moderates. And so the thing that was not measured and that no one thought was actually happening was losing these people. And so you have this next election cycle, and you can see the underlying remnants of these original movements that were inherently based on bad ideas. Like, these fueled these exact counter movements that won Trump the presidency. It felt like it was this huge, giant culture war of like the wokeism left versus the like American traditionalist right. And that's where you started having people who were traditionally Democrat, or should I say centrist, coming out and co-signing Trump. Like you had Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Rogan and RFK and Elon Musk and all of these people who genuinely talk to them or look at any interview of them in like 2016, 2017, 2018, and they're like Democrat, like liberal, pro-choice, pro-drug decriminalization, pro-immigration, like all of these stances. But you are watching this doubling down that the progressive movement made just push these people away. Because when you build these spaces where no opinion that goes against the status quo is allowed, you completely lose touch of reality. And for all the people who were like shocked that Trump won, it just meant that you weren't listening enough. You did not have enough conversations with people who didn't agree with you on certain things. And I know I'm kind of like going off on a slight tangent where I'm getting a little bit more about the politics of all this, but it's just so deeply intertwined. I'm very interested to see how this episode does with you guys. I hope that I'm making sense, but anyway, let's reel it back in a little bit. So now you're in today. Trump's won the presidency. Everyone who hates these social justice movements is tweeting, "We are so back." And the stock market is crashing. The economy is fucked. Everything is happening all at once. But we're watching a lot of movements, particularly like in Hollywood and like the deep youth culture of like Gen Z and like young Gen Z, like focus really hard on the 2000s again. because that is considered counterculture now. Like the skinny look is back. You're seeing people posting on like their Pinterest, and genuinely, because Pinterest is making a comeback with like the younger crowd. You're seeing them post like low-waisted jeans, like the low-rise traditional jeans where the tramp stamp could be shown off, or girls were wearing like that like string of jewels that would go around their waist. I can't remember what it's called right now. But you're watching this stuff make a comeback, and it's because for the longest time the conversations culturally were like, beauty is a subjective societal standard made up completely by culture, not anything to do with human nature. Anyone at any weight is beautiful and XYZ, and you know, that whole sensitive discussion, even though you make these people pick who they actually fuck or who they actually date, and everyone's beauty standards are pretty much calibrated for the most part. And basically, like, kind of just this wave of inauthentic behavior, all in the guise of trying to make the little guy feel better. Again, back to my point of intentions versus outcome. The intentions were there. You know, make people who get shit on by douchebags feel better about themselves because they deserve to feel good, and everyone has value, and I agree with that. But there was also just, it felt like, kind of like I said before, the emperor with no clothes. It kind of felt like people parading around being absolutely ridiculous and not being honest about a lot of things. And no one, oh God, I'm getting something in my throat. No one having the balls to call them out. And so this is where the issue lies, is, again, we are doing the same old swing of the pendulum where no one is trying to dismantle a current social wave of bad ideas with good ideas, or with discussions, or an exchange of opinion. It's, oh no, we'll just counter them. We'll fight fire with fire. We'll just take advantage of all the pissed off, young, insecure people who agree with us, and let everyone create an anonymous account online, and everyone tweets from their burners heinous shit. And so I'm tired. I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, to be completely honest with you guys, and I really appreciate if you've been listening so far. I hope I've been making sense, and I hope anyone who has seen what I have seen understands where I'm coming from on this. Now to move forward. I think that this is an opportunity right now to start creating a space for proper role models for young men. I really do believe that as a man, you should be proud of being a man. You should lean into the aspects that make you different, make you unique, make you stand out. If you want to be big and strong, and I know this sounds like I'm talking to a child, but really so much of this roots in like the boy and all of these men, and who can speak to it. Andrew Tate can speak to the hurt boy in a lot of these men, and that's why these men act like boys, if that makes any sense. But if you want to be big and strong, then go work out, build those muscles, build that aesthetic, grow out your body hair, really lean into your manliness. A huge amount of women find it absolutely attractive, and no matter what the online discussion is, that will always be the case. I think also this is why there's a huge movement on the right for like bodybuilding, for fitness, for like make America healthy again, because it's like directly going against the whole movement of either like these super like the more masculine you are, the more toxic you are, and also the conversation of like, I'm not unhealthy, I'm just fat by genetics. And so the right makes this huge counterpoint, and now there's this whole movement with RFK. There's a ton of like fucking hardcore European EDM compilations of bodybuilders with like, like beat what God intended, and it's like pow, 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 and it's just Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was 22. And this is just like blowing up in like conservative spaces, which is fucking hilarious, because if you go back to old conservatism, like that was considered like so flashy. And if you had like the long hair, you were considered feminine, and you were supposed to be traditional and God-fearing and to yourself and well-clothed and well-behaved. And now it's just the total opposite. But I could go on a whole rant about my issues with conservatism and the lack of consistency. But that's for another time, friends. Regardless, back to my point. As a man, you should be able to be proud to be a man. You should not allow anyone to make you feel otherwise, because this is the body and person that you were born with. And the only thing expected of you is that you are, and this is the thing, this is what I think a lot of men miss, because they're weak, pussy-minded, insecure little boys. Look at me, I'm part of the problem. Is that the stronger you are, or the more dominant you feel as a man, the bigger your role to be the protector, to be the peacekeeper, to be the one who looks out for women, not takes advantage of them. The key to a woman's heart is making her feel safe and comfortable. And if all you can do is show her that you have zero control over your emotions, or can't think with anything other than your penis, then it doesn't matter how good looking you are, how much money you make, how much muscle you build, or how manly you are, you will repel women and then call all of them bitches or whores because they didn't want to fuck you, and then not understand why they would go for a goober like me. And it's all because I'm just not a piece of shit. And so, and I say all of this, funny enough, with my plans for one of my next guests, if not my very next guest, is one of like my most masculine, total fucking Chad bro friends ever. But he is just the perfect example. He's the fucking perfect example of what I'm talking about right now. He completely embodies what it means to be a masculine man. He fucking shoots guns and he works out and he's like this chiseled bro. Love him. And at the same time, he's like such a family man, and he is very sweet, and he's constantly nice to people and constantly looking out for others. That is literally what it means to actually be a fucking man. I will say this right now with my whole chest to anyone listening who's a friend of mine. If you look up to Andrew Tate, you need to look inside first. You really need to do some self-introspection. Because quite frankly, that guy's a piece of shit. Does he have certain occasional points where he is correct? Sure. So do a lot of religions that I don't agree with. But that's just what it means to be correct on one opinion and still fucking completely out of touch on other things. And I understand if you're a guy and you feel hurt because of a lot of these online discussions. I was that guy for a long time. I was constantly bitter towards anyone who stood for this like feminism stance, or anyone who was basically telling me that my group of people are the root of all evil in the world and the oppressor of every minority group or other gender scape. And that I should feel guilty or bad either about other men who are like me making these terrible choices, or men in the past who have done these things. I should somehow feel guilty. Fuck those people, dude. Absolutely piss off. Do not give them any time of day, and don't give them any of your peace of mind. You should be able to feel like yourself and not feel insecure about it. I will tell you right now, my personal synopsis, my personal theory is that, like, I don't know, 90% of all the problems in the world root from insecurity, and then people acting on them. And in my opinion, there is nothing more dangerous than a man with a fragile ego and a short fuse, because they are willing to incite violence at anything that threatens them. And so I steer so clear of those people. They're going to get me killed or in jail, and I don't even need to be doing anything. I just need to be there. And so, yeah, I don't know, guys. Right now, the culture's not looking great in the male space. It really does feel like we're completely swinging the other way, and I don't want that to be the case. And I think if you're a guy, I think you kind of have a little bit of an obligation to stand as an example for what it means to be a good man. Go to therapy, dude. Please go to therapy. Everyone should go to therapy, but men specifically love the feeling of acting like they don't. Like, oh, I work out, that's my therapy. Or, oh, no, I just need to go out into the forest and stare off and think. Like, no, dude, you need to talk about your feelings. You need to talk about the traumatic childhood that your parents put you through. You need to talk about the girl that dumped you and just absolutely decimated your confidence that you never fucking sprung back from. You need to bite the bullet, pay the money, sit down and talk to a licensed professional, and I promise you, you're going to cry, and it's going to be okay because you should be able to cry, and it doesn't make you a bitch, and you're going to get it out. You're going to untangle all of this, and you're finally going to be able to move on. There is a huge trend, and I'm sure it's not the first time this trend has happened, but around like the glamorization of suffering for men, because it makes you look strong when you can endure suffering. In my opinion, unnecessary suffering brought on for the sake of displaying suffering is weak. It shows that you don't know how to handle your own problems. It shows that you're doing it for the sake of display because there's a part of you and you're communicating it. That part of you wants to be validated by other people that you're manly. And so you say, no, I don't do therapy. I just drink. Or no, I don't talk about my feelings. I don't cry because it's a bitch. It's like you want to be seen as manly so fucking bad that you're being performative. And any real man can fucking smell it. So, with that being said, just bite the bullet, dude. Go through the right processes. I'm telling you, there is nothing more like therapeutic or cathartic than talking to a woman about your feelings. One who genuinely cares. And also, not having the intention of fucking her. You actually have to want a real conversation or a real friendship. But it's no matter how good you are with your bros, no matter how tight you are with the homies, there's nothing like it. And you can very much so get this from your girlfriend if you have a girlfriend, if you just want to be vulnerable and honest. And if she makes you feel like shit for that, congratulations, you just realized that you need to leave this person. But most women who care about you and want to be your world would love to hear you finally open up about your feelings. But if you don't have that, it's also possible to do with a friend. Even better, a therapist. But if you're a man and you're seeking the self-improvement journey and you want to be great, you want to be better, and you want to be someone, you have to be able to build emotional intelligence. You have to be able to build self-esteem the healthy way, all of this stuff that I constantly repeat on here. But I'm saying this because it feels more crucial nowadays than ever when you have terrible male icons feeling comfortable enough to propagate absolute garbage into the space, and it gets muddled and mixed up with really good advice for men. And most people in general, not just guys, have a hard time differentiating between what's good advice to follow and what would genuinely make you a shitty person if you enacted it in your life. But I don't know. Let me try and summarize. We're breaking the hour mark here, and I want to try not to bore you guys on topics if you have zero interest in them, but also be authentic. So let's reel it in a bit and look at the big picture. There's a huge push right now for the return of idolized masculinity, and I am here for a lot of it. I think it's great that men finally feel like they're building online spaces where they can be proud to be a man again. I think that's huge. just make sure you know what it means to be a real man. Do not get confused, and do not let these false idols lead you astray. I sound like a fucking Old Testament prophet right now. And I think that this wave of manliness and return to male pride is directly rooted in a complete counterswing to the prior absolute shit on men for the sake of performative behavior, online discussions in media and universities and blah, blah, blah. And I'm hoping for people who had no idea why this culture shift is happening, that this kind of paints a picture where it's like there isn't a lack of consequences for bad ideas, especially when they're broadcasted on a national or global scale. You can think just because you're dominating the space that it may feel like there's no harm, no foul. But there is, because there's always the silent majority. If you're up on stage flapping your fucking gums about some terrible idea and the whole crowd cheers, that's just because that's your audience, dude. And as soon as it gets put out online, it has 5 million views and 100,000 likes. Notice that 4.9 million people out of the 5 million who watched it didn't like it. That's not a coincidence. But most people just see the likes. They just see someone spatting a terrible opinion and there being so much support for it. And they're like, look, so many people agree with me. I'm objectively right. As if the amount of people who agree with you on a topic is any litmus for actual, for as Joel would say, actual factual, for real truth. And so I don't know. I really hope that if this project I'm doing gains any traction, that I can be someone who's contributing to like fighting terrible ideas. I think nowadays with the internet and misinformation, it's just never been worse. And I'm really hoping that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and things do get better. And it's either that or we're just going to be perpetually swinging the pendulum too far to the left and too far to the right until some terrible disruptor happens. Not to be pessimistic. But yeah, so I think this current movement came from a direct counter to everything, like I've said. And I don't know. I'm gonna be doing my best to encourage the men in my life and around me to be further examples of good men, and hope that they do the same as me and push that out onto their peers. There's gonna be guys that don't listen. There's gonna be a ton of them. But what matters is if there is actually change happening in the right direction. And as long as I'm putting efforts towards that, then I'm going to be hopeful. And guys, I know that a huge amount of your confidence revolves around women. Your best bet is to cast your ego aside and listen to them. Ask them what they like, ask them what they want, ask them what the bad parts of them are and the good parts of them are. They will tell you. It's not hard to find a nice girl who's willing to talk to you. I got a ton of yappers in my life, and they know who they are, and I love them to death. But they're my prime examples of if you want to understand women, you just ask. And if you're willing to cast your ego aside and stop letting your insecurities get in the way of truth, you will actually start doing really well with women. You'll start knowing how to talk to them. You'll develop a natural charisma. You'll be able to attract them, and from there you can actually build your confidence. And then you won't have to constantly scramble to protect your ego whenever anything properly challenges it. Because that's just the direct cause of fucking, God, 80% of this shit. But I don't know. I feel like I've said my piece, guys. I feel like I've kind of hit all of the points that I want to hit on this. Because quite frankly, like, these are the qualities in which I filter men in and out of my life. I mean, I only want to be surrounded, as to the best of my ability, with men that I feel like, when given a fork in the road to make a good decision or a bad one, are going to make a good one. And when given a fork in the road, if they're going to protect someone smaller than them, whether that be a child or a woman or just a smaller man, they choose to protect them, make them feel safe, make them feel comfortable, rather than take advantage of them or manipulate them or push them to do things that they're uncomfortable with. There's a huge obligation as a man to make sure that you are actively being ethical. And so if I smell that on you, if I think that you are insecure, have ego problems, or when no one's looking will make the wrong decision, you won't even know it. But I will politely remove myself from your life, because the last thing I need is for anyone to see me associated with you. You know, I see you, I'll say hello, give you a smile, maybe a handshake and a nod, and keep it pushing, because I'm not one to cause problems. But I don't know. Introspection is worth its weight in gold. I will say that. But I think I'll end it here, guys. I really hope that this was listenable. So there are times where I cannot gauge. I'll just be so real with you guys for a couple of minutes, and I'll let you go. I'll let you enjoy your Wednesday or your rest of your week, whatever day you're listening to this. But I really can't gauge how enjoyable my episodes are sometimes. There are times where I feel like I'm repeating myself and I'm talking in circles, and who the fuck would listen to this? And then someone will reach out to me and be like, that was life-changing. Like, you spoke directly to me. I saw God, like the XYZ, you know? And I'm like, wow. Honestly, I thought it was my worst episode, or like I thought it was hot garbage. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. I don't know. But when I end episodes and I'm like, I hope you enjoyed this, or I hope this was listenable, like I genuinely am hoping. Like I genuinely mean it. And I have no idea if you are a woman and one of my friends, please let me know if this was listenable. And if you didn't even get to this part, then that'll be a message enough. And hopefully to all my boys and all my guy friends that you either were right here with me being like, fuck yeah, this is exactly how I feel, or this is a bit of a wake-up call, and by all means, you can also reach out to me and talk to me about it. I would love to help you pick your own brain and figure out why you feel the way you do, and what emotions are good and what emotions shouldn't be validated or whatnot. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. It really means the most to me. I know with the last episode, we did that little thing where we were like, oh, comment if you got to the end of the episode. And just like seeing one comment alone, let alone the like multiple that I got, just, it's like, wow, you guys really do listen to these episodes. Like, what the fuck? How cool is that? It's a feeling I'll never get over. And I'm working on video. I swear to God, it's my main project right now. I just suck at it. Yeah. Let's end it. I love you guys. Thank you for listening. I hope this was great. I hope it did something for you. We'll be back next week, as we always are. Keep it unserious, folks, because you know how unserious this fucking episode was. Yeah, okay, bye. Love y'all. Stay hot. Bye.